If you're divorcing a narcissist, you're in for a marathon, not a sprint. So settle in, get comfortable, and work on your strategy.
A lot of clients who are trying to leave an abusive spouse ask me, what if they won't sign the divorce papers? My answer to them is always this: they cannot stop you from getting a divorce, but they can drag it out. It's not a matter of if, but when. I would define delay tactics as the manipulation of procedural rules by one party to their own benefit and to the other party's detriment. And I would say people often use delay tactics to try to get an upper hand in a case that they think may not otherwise go their way. If the laws and the facts are not on your side, delay, delay, delay. At least that's how it seems to go very often. And the problem is, the procedural rules do tend to enable at least some extent of this behavior. This is especially problematic and I would say can easily rise to the level of litigation abuse if the party using the delay tactics has a history of abusing the other party. Controlling the procedure and the timeline of the survivor's ability to leave safely is basically the only control they have left to hang on to once the survivor has filed for a divorce. That being said, litigation abuse is a very broad topic that probably requires a whole separate multi-part video series, so I will try to do that one day, but for now, I want to talk about some common examples of delay tactics that I have seen and my suggestions for how to deal with them. The first example of a delay tactic I see in family cases is service related. Service of process is an essential part of due process in our court system. It is the procedure by which someone who has had a lawsuit filed against them is provided with official notice of that lawsuit and the claims that are filed against them. It also starts the clock for that person to file some kind of responsive pleading. In Florida Family Court, a respondent has 20 days from the date of service to file a response. If they do not file any kind of responsive pleading within that time frame, the other party can then file what's called a motion for a default, and the clerk would enter a default against the respondent. What the default would do is then allow the petitioner to proceed with the case uncontested. But in order for that 20-day clock to even start, the respondent has to be served. So what do they do to delay here? Evade service, hide, run, refuse to get served in one way or another. Now, it's not always smart to evade service forever because there is also something called a diligent search and constructive service, which I will have to make another separate video about sometime, but suffice it to say that constructive service based on a diligent search almost always results in a default against the respondent. The thing about a default is that it renders the petition uncontested. So the person who filed the divorce or custody case will then basically get everything they've asked for in their petition with some practical limitations. That means it's usually to the respondent's benefit to eventually be served, but the sheriff's office usually attempts service 2 to 3 times before giving up. And that process can take a few weeks or maybe even more. If service, whether personal or constructive, is not effectuated or completed within 120 days of the petition being filed, the whole case may actually be dismissed. This is why it is always a good idea to have a service plan or a strategy before you file a petition. Do you have their home address? Do you have a work address and their work schedule? Or do you know any other place they frequent and when? They don't have to be served at home. They just have to be handed the paperwork. That is what personal service is called. So if you know somewhere that they go every day or every week that the sheriff can find them for service, put that on the summons and they will look for them there. But if you don't have any idea where the other person is, you haven't seen them in years, you will still have to attempt personal service at their last known address first. But once that inevitably fails because they're not there anymore, you can then proceed with the diligent search and constructive service. And that process in and of itself takes about a month to complete. Because the clock starts ticking when the petition is filed, it's always a good idea to have a plan or strategy for how you're going to effectuate service within that 120-day deadline, and ideally much sooner than that. Okay, so let's say you effectuated service and they filed a response within the 20-day deadline. The second delay tactic I see often is in discovery, which I will talk about in my next video, so stay tuned for more and thanks for listening.